A hush settled over the plain as if the land itself had learned to breathe more slowly. In the cool hours before dawn, the palace lay wrapped in a soft penumbra, its corridors quiet, its lamps flickering with patient light. Within a chamber that looked out to gardens of patient green, Queen Maya rested with hands folded as if holding a small private thought. Her breathing was steady, a calm tide moving in and out, and the days that had come before felt as though they had been arranged by a careful hand into a single long pattern. In that stillness, the world beyond the palace, fields and hedgerows, distant hills and slow rivers, also seemed to move in quieter measure, as if waiting with gentle patience for something tender to arrive. The palace servants moved with soft, practiced steps. Footfalls were muffled against woven mats, and the murmur of conversation thinned into a barely audible tapestry. In the gardens beyond, sal trees rose with slow dignity, their trunks standing like columns that supported a steady sky. The air carried faint scents, fresh earth warmed by earlier sun, the distant sweetness of jasmine, the crispness of newly turned leaves, and each scent seemed to settle the mind in some small way. Queen Maya found herself wandering the shaded lanes more often, tracing fingers along bark ridged with age, listening to the leaves that whispered like gentle shuttles weaving a quiet pattern through the air. One night, when the moon had rounded to a soft half-glow, she dreamed of a white elephant moving through pale mist. The animal's steps were slow, composed, and luminous. It moved with the deliberate grace of someone who understands the tempo of things. The dream left behind a feeling like a warm shawl wrapped about the shoulders, comforting, steady, and luminous in a faint way. When morning spread a thin wash of light over the gardens, the queen told the tale of the dream in calm sentences, and wise men who read omens came to listen in soft robes. They spoke in hushed tones that matched the quiet of the hour, and their words read to the queen like long, patient notes, signs of auspice and slow, promising change rather than storm. As seasons turned with unforced regularity, a journey to Lumbini was planned, not as an event of proclamation, but as a quiet retreat to a garden chosen for its shade and temperate air. The path to the grove wound through fields that rolled gently like a calm sea. Cattle grazed with slow rhythm. Women with baskets walked at an easy step. Distant labor moved in the even cadence of weathered hands. Arriving in the garden was like entering a held breath. The place sat quietly, its ponds reflecting the sky in long, patient patches, its grasses bending in repeated arcs to the touch of small winds. Queen Maya moved through this pale green hush, placing palms against tree trunks, feeling their old heartbeats pass, slow and true, through her own steady hand.
Under a sal tree, shaded and cool, the moment of coming was neither violent nor frantic. The child's entry into the world resembled a small boat slipping into still water, a soft gliding that made barely a ripple. There were no loud cries, no sudden flares of alarm, only the measured, quieting work of breath and the gentle forming of small hands and quiet cheeks. When the child took 7 tiny steps, each was soft and even, and each step seemed to land upon the earth, as though the ground itself had learned to accept the weight with gentle deference. Around him, the garden slowed further, each sound drawn into longer notes. Wind, leaf, and footfall melted into a single, soft refrain. The child's presence shaped the rhythms in subtle ways. Lamps burned lower in the palace that night, their flames small and steady. Meals were prepared with tender care, cutting and setting the fruit in slow, neat piles. The attendants moved with attentive calm, smoothing cloth and adjusting cushions with gestures that had the precision of someone tending a small fire. The king observed in quiet wonder, his gaze lingering on the steady breath of the newborn, on the small, deliberate motions that hinted at an inward depth. It was as though the palace had acquired a new center, a soft point around which the world might now turn in gentler gear. Outside the palace, villagers and travelers felt the change as one feels a shift in the weather, slow, certain, and without sharpness. A trader who passed the palace on his route would later remark, in a voice as calm as an old wood's creak, that the air felt sweeter, as if some small kindness had been added to the wind. Farmers, leaning on their hoes at sundown, found their tasks adopting a patient rhythm. Chores were done with the attentive slowness of hands that had learned to accept time as a companion rather than a foe. The market's clamor remarked itself into a quieter hum. Voices sounded rounder, more measured, less edged by haste. The child's early days shaped themselves out of small, ordinary acts, holding a bowl with a curious care, watching the long trail of a river from a low bank, following a flock of birds until the eye softened with concentration. There was a likeness to the days of laborers and gardeners, an echo of hands folded in steady work. He watched the play of light on polished stone and the way shadows lengthened in the late afternoon. These observations were slow and patient, as though the child had an older clock within that required no hurry and no sudden corrections. Often he would sit by an open window where the world moved in measured crossings, the distant footpaths, the river curling beneath a low bridge, the slow passage of cloud over hilltops. Here he learned the small languages of ordinary things, how rain coaxed a different scent from the soil, how a bowl accepted a spoon's rhythm, how the flap of a bird's wing rendered the air momentarily cool. He listened to elderly men speak of simple, dependable matters, of nets and teacups, and small improvements to roof that would hold wind better. He accepted these words like gathered seeds, knowing that small, repeated care might grow into something larger, not through force, but by patient tending. In the palace, rhythms rearranged themselves into long, mellow arcs. Evenings acquired a softer edge. Conversations moved in calmer cadences and often paused to let breath fall. The household's chores were done with an affection that looked almost ceremonial, routines performed with a thoughtfulness that made small tasks feel like offerings. Sometimes the child would roll up a small mat and walk the courtyard with it, laying it in a precise place and smoothing the edges until each fold looked like a small, complete shape. These simple acts carried no drama, but a kind of silent devotion, and they taught those who observed him to value steadiness and presence over spectacle. News of the child moved slowly, carried by measured mouths and patient storytellers. The tale did not rush through towns and markets as the shouting of urgent tidings might. Instead, it traveled like a thread pulled through fabric, steady, connecting one person to another with small, intimate gestures. At tea stalls and recollected hearths, people told the story in gentle sentences, letting each detail linger before releasing it, as if reluctant to hurry the narrative forward. In such retellings, the quietness of the birth was emphasized more than any grandeur. Listeners took note of the hush under the sal tree and the way the child's first steps had landed like soft footfalls across a long, empty hall. Even the animals seemed to settle into this new tempo. Dogs lying in the courtyard folded their legs with an entirely new patience. Cows grazed with longer nibbles, unhurried and full. Birds struck small, careful arcs across the sky, as if moved by an unseen hand toward gentleness. The world responded not through loud proclamation, but by aligning itself with a softer metronome. Slow inhalation, slow exhalation, again and again. Time unfolded like a long map of gentle hills. The child grew in quiet increments, each day a small page added to a patient book. Lessons came without fanfare. Learning to fold cloth so edges sat flat, to tie small knots that would not slip, to wash bowls until their surfaces returned to a calm, steady sheen. He was content in company that moved like deliberate clocks. Old women who embroidered with slow hands. Gardeners who pruned branches with a mindful patience. Monks who walked the temple paths in near silent lines. From such people, he took to heart the idea that presence itself could be an offering. On afternoons thick with warmth, he would wander to the riverbank and sit where water moved around the stones in little, tireless patterns. He watched pebbles glint beneath the current, small mirrors that caught the sun and released it in loosened flashes. He learned in those quiet hours to match his breath to the river's slow rhythm, inhaling as the water pressed near, exhaling as it moved away. Such simple mimicry taught him a steadiness that needed no force. It came from aligning with the soft pulse of the day. Sometimes he walked with an elder who liked to speak in measured, gentle phrases. Their conversations were less about pronouncements and more about noticing. The elder would point out how a line of ants carried crumbs in a precise procession, or how moss built itself slowly on shaded stones. Each observation was made without hurry and left unadorned, as though truth was best held in uncluttered shape. The child listened without pressing for summation. He gathered simple patterns and stored them in the quiet places of his mind. The palace's life, too, embodied a rhythm of small consecrations. Lamps were lined at dusk as a patient custom. Meals were prepared, then shared in a calm circle of small, courteous exchanges. There was a pervasive sense that attention paid to small things repaired and steadied the spirit. If a bowl chipped, it was mended with care and patience. If a window stuck, it was oiled and eased until it moved like a satisfied limb. Each such small repair held a lesson that loud displays could not match. That steadiness gave shape to days, and that repetition, if practiced with softness, became its own kind of solace. As the child's awareness deepened, questions arose not as startling demands, but as quiet curiosities. He hoped to understand how small acts translated into larger patterns, how tending one plant could become a lifetime of care, how one calm sentence might change the tone of many days, how a single steady hand could teach another to move without haste. When he spoke of such things, fewer words were used and more silence. This silence was not empty, but full of small, listening spaces in which thought could settle and broaden. Visitors occasionally came to the palace, travelers whose roads had been long, and whose speech moved like distant thunder softened by distance. They spoke of far places in voices that had a thin weariness. The child listened politely and then returned to the familiar grace of slow tasks. Rather than responding with eager enchantment, he folded these stories into the manner of the world he already knew, accepting travel tales as flowers pressed into a book, beautiful but still only small tokens among many. In the market and on the roads, people began to notice a change in their own ways. They found themselves pausing more often. Old songs came back into the mornings, hummed as people worked their small trades. The slow cadence of life reached the innermost corners of ordinary days. Even those who had once hurried through tasks began laying them out with gentle deliberation, mindful that a steady rhythm sustained better than a rushed sprint. The child's manner, which favored slow observation and kind attentiveness, quietly encouraged such shifts without making demands or pronouncements. There were moments of small, wordless wonder, an elder showing how to repair a cracked pot with delicate paste, a farmer teaching how to plant seeds so they might find their way into the soil without being crowded, a weaver showing how repeated, patient strokes of the shuttle produced a pattern that could be read like a soft, secret language. From these small gestures, the child absorbed a patient pedagogy. That faithful repetition, practiced with tenderness, could yield enduring forms. The nights retained their own soft fabric. He would walk with someone along moonlit corridors while the palace slept, feeling the cool air collect like a moderate shawl on the shoulders. They spoke of simple tasks for tomorrow. Who would sweep the courtyard? Who would fetch fresh water from the well? And these plans were made with an acceptance that time would carry them forward in its own steady way. There was pleasure in being part of rhythms that repeated, for repetition produced comfort and order. Repetition taught the heart to relax into reliable shapes rather than sprint for uncertain ends. In quiet sessions, parents and elders taught him that the deepest work often took the form of patient presence. They told stories not to thrill, but to point to ordinary virtues, persistence in small acts, compassion in small gestures, steadiness in the face of slow weather. These were not heroic tales of conquest, but modest accounts of how a hand might mend what had frayed, and how a listening ear might make a neighbor lighter with its attention. Such instruction suited the child. He was drawn to repair and tending, to small rituals that inflated into quiet virtues through repetition. As the seasons wore on, the child continued to embody a deliberate slowness that felt both familiar and quietly luminous. People came and went, carrying with them small stories of their own, and the palace remained a place where rhythms were practiced with the soft rigor of a daily liturgy. He continued to sit by windows where light moved in long bands across the floor, tracing the passage of the sun with an attentive calm, and to wander garden paths where every stone bore humidity and memory. In the modest tasks, arranging petals in a bowl, threading a needle, helping a neighbor tend a modest injury, he practiced a kind of gentle devotion, a habitual attentiveness that softened the edges of ordinary life. There were quiet acknowledgments of his presence, a neighbor bringing extra grain, a farmer pausing to exchange a kind word, an old friend offering a seat in the shade. None of these acknowledgments hammered judgment nor forced destiny. They were small, steady nods of recognition that added up over days and months. He responded not with proclamation, but with small, steady reciprocations, an extra helping prepared carefully, a tool returned in clean order, a gentle remark that required little response, yet comforted in its simplicity. Sometimes, in the cool hush before dawn, he would step beyond the palace gates and walk a little distance into the village. People who rose early to fetch water or stoke small ovens would nod and return to their tasks in the comfort of his unobtrusive presence. Children would run past with a kind of quiet joy, small, untroubled laughter that rose like bubbles and faded into the soft air. He watched them with the tolerant patience of someone who understood that innocence itself was a kind of steadying force. Questions about future paths still drifted through conversations, but always as gentle thoughts rather than urgent demands. The child's manner suggested no hurry toward a grand accomplishment. Instead, it offered an invitation to slow, to notice, to practice calmness as if it were a craft. Those who observed him learned to take heart in small measures. They found the value of a well-swept courtyard, the steadiness of a kindly word, the clarity that attention brought to everyday moments. In time, their own days acquired a softness and a sturdier sense of meaning that did not require spectacle or fevered pursuit. The palace and the world around it continued in their slow harmonies. The sal trees warmed and shed leaves in patient cycles. Rains came and left with unforced regularity. People repeated their small rituals and found in repetition a comfortable, reliable rhythm. The child, still young, still learning, was both shaped by and shaping these currents. He remained a small point of stillness in a broader world that moved in gentle arcs, and wherever he went, calm seemed to follow, not as a command, but as a natural consequence of steady, attentive living. On an ordinary evening, when the sky softened into a gentle dusk, lanterns were arranged in small groups across the palace courtyard. The hush that settled felt like a long inhale followed by a pleased, complete exhale. The child lay down on a simple mat covered with a thin woven cloth, and the stars above began their patient watch. The palace's lights dimmed further, and the world seemed to tuck itself slowly into rest. The tale of his birth under the sal tree had become part of the quiet tapestry of the place, a story told and retold, softer with each telling, until it counted less as an event and more as an instruction in how to be gentle in the ordinary. And so the first story found a soft conclusion, a beginning that was itself a practice in quietness, a life that invited the world to become a little less hurried. It offered no dramatic promise, no loud revelation. Instead, it offered a steady lesson in presence, in small acts of care that accumulated, in patient attention that never demanded applause, in the repetition of quiet rituals. The child's early days taught that calm could be cultivated like a garden, tended by daily, unhurried hands until it bore the unshowy fruit of simplicity and peace. The storyteller pauses now, and the space between tales widens just enough for breath to deepen. The next story waits in the hush, a tale of sights that shift a heart, each framed with the same soft penumbra that has guided this one. Lamps settle. A small wind stirs the curtains, as if to say that the slow tide of stories will continue. The channel's gentle arc is steady and unbroken, and the listener, should anyone be present in that soft, private house of hearing, may rest in this steady, unassuming hush until the next wave arrives. A gentle quiet stretched across the palace grounds, the kind of quiet that formed after many seasons of steady living. The young prince moved through these hallways with the soft awareness of someone who had grown up inside an ordered calm. His steps were light, unhurried, and his gaze drifted easily along tapestries and shaded walkways. Each day lingered like a warm afternoon, each moment unfolding with a slow, dependable rhythm. The life within the palace felt like a long, deep breath held between morning and dusk, a breath that rose and fell with regular predictability. The palace itself had become a world of gentle abundance. Gardens bloomed with predictable cycles. Attendants moved through rooms with balanced, practiced movements. Musicians played soft melodies that dissolved into the air like faint strands of incense. There were no harsh sounds, no startling movements, only a soft arrangement of comfort, shaped to keep the prince's surroundings free from unease. The king, with tender intention, ensured that the prince grew in a sphere untouched by hardship. Within these walls, youth developed in calm layers, each year joining the next, like a slow tide brushing the shore. The prince's curiosity, though soft, was steady. He took notice of subtle things, how a leaf curled at its edges before falling, how light warmed the palace stones at midday, how a servant's posture shifted after many hours of quiet work. He did not yet know what lay beyond the palace gates, but he sensed that the world held rhythms far older and far wider than the patterns within the palace. At times, when he stood near the carved windows that looked toward the far hills, a faint wondering stirred in him, gentle and nearly formless, yet persistent enough to make him pause. The king, aware of this soft stirring, arranged the days so the prince would remain within the palace grounds, surrounded only by scenes of youth and health, beauty and smooth continuance. Yet even the tenderest arrangements could not subdue the quiet longing that gathered in the prince's heart. It grew not as a cry, but as a distant hum, a yearning to see the world whose breath he felt in passing winds. One morning, as the sun rose in pale gold, the prince asked to visit the gardens beyond the palace walls. The king hesitated, but seeing the mildness in the request, he allowed a small procession to prepare a calm route for the prince to travel. Attendants swept the path, clearing it of debris. Musicians arranged themselves in soft clusters. Decorations were hung in gentle colors, chosen so no discord would disturb the prince's feelings. Everything was prepared to maintain the soft world he had always known. The prince stepped into the prepared chariot, his hands resting lightly on the wooden frame. The horses moved at a slow pace, guided by attendants who matched their steps to a lull and gave the procession a dreamy steadiness. The prince's eyes followed passing gardens, adored bushes trimmed with care, bright flowers arranged like patient patterns, children running with light laughter across the softened paths. Everything was beautiful, familiar, and held within boundaries shaped to soothe. Yet the world, even in its calmest moments, often allows small truths to appear. Ahead on the road, an old man walked slowly, supported by a wooden staff. His back bent inward with age. His hair had turned a quiet silver. His steps were cautious and uneven. Wrinkles folded gently across his face, and his breath carried a faint tremor. The prince had never seen such a sight. His gaze lingered, not in fear, but in deep wonder, as if trying to understand what had caused such a transformation. The attendants, startled by the appearance, whispered among themselves. But the image remained, steady and undeniable. An old man, leaning on time itself. The prince watched him move with the soft ache of years across the road, the staff making small, hollow sounds against the earth. The prince's heart moved in a slow, deep ripple. Something shifted in him, quietly, as if a curtain had been drawn back to reveal a landscape long hidden. The procession continued at its slow pace, but the prince's thoughts drifted like low clouds. The sight had settled into his mind, not with shock, but with soft gravity. He looked again at the path, but saw now that life might carry many unseen forms, each one shaped by time's calm hand. Days passed, and the prince continued to move through the palace with the same calm rhythms, though his mind carried the memory of the old man in a place where questions gathered like folded leaves in a quiet pool. He felt the faint stirring of contemplation, gentle yet persistent, like a tide that had begun to draw inward. In time, he asked again to travel outside the walls. The king prepared the procession once more, arranging music, decorations, and carefully tended paths. They hoped to recreate the familiar softness, to return the prince's attention to youth and harmony. But life, in its quiet instruction, allowed another sight to appear. On this gentle outing, the prince saw a man leaning against a wall, breathing in shallow, uneven rhythm. His body trembled. His skin grew pale in patches. His eyes held a deep weariness that softened the edges of his expression. An attendant tried to guide the prince's gaze away, but the prince's attention remained fixed. He saw the man's trembling fingers, the sweat upon his brow, the slow strain of breath. It was sickness, unfiltered, tender, and human. The prince watched, his expression softening, his breath lengthening. This sight also settled into him, layering itself beside the old man. The world beyond the palace walls seemed to be revealing a pattern, not sudden or harsh, but insistent in its quiet truth. The chariot moved on, winding through gentle roads, past fields and small gatherings of villagers, but the prince remained absorbed in contemplation. His world had begun to widen, not with noise, but with soft, inevitable understanding. The days that followed moved with the same quiet flow, but the prince carried within him a gentle, growing awareness. The old man and the sick man drifted through his thoughts, like soft shadows moving beneath still water. The palace remained beautiful, peaceful, filled with music and warmth, yet the prince felt the soft weight of change beneath the surface. The world outside the walls no longer seemed distant. It felt near, humming with truths he had barely begun to understand. Still, he walked the palace gardens in calm rhythms, watching birds settle upon branches and leaves turn slightly in the breeze. Servants tended to small tasks, sweeping stone paths in unhurried arcs, arranging flowers in careful lines, adjusting cushions with the same patient repetition that had shaped the palace since his birth. Everything appeared unchanged, and yet the prince sensed that the same hands which smoothed fabric and polished metal might someday tremble with age or illness. The thought moved through him slowly, quiet and contemplative, like a long breath held in the chest before being released. The king, gentle in his concern, tried once again to renew the palace's atmosphere of youthful harmony. Musicians played longer into the evenings, dancers stepped with softer grace, feasts were arranged to evoke joy and ease. But the prince's heart had begun to drift into deeper reflections. The world felt wider now, and even the harmonious melodies that once soothed him carried faint undercurrents of questions. After several days, the prince requested another outing beyond the palace grounds. The king agreed, though his thoughts grew heavier with every request. Still, he arranged the route as before. Flowers placed along the road, attendants sweeping aside any signs of hardship, the path prepared so that the prince might once again see the world softened into familiar ideas. But quiet truths have a way of appearing even through careful arrangements. As the chariot rolled along the smooth road, the prince observed a small group gathered in a distant clearing. Their voices carried only faintly, drifting like low breezes. At the center lay a man who did not move at all. His body rested flat against the earth. His skin was pale, his hands still, his chest unmoving. Those around him sat in heavy silence, some with lowered heads, others with eyes that glimmered in the dim light. The procession slowed as the prince watched the group with gentle focus. The attendants shifted uneasily, aware that this sight, death, was not one they had meant for him to witness. But the truth was already unfolding before him in soft, irreversible lines. The prince looked at the still figure, noticing how peaceful the body appeared, as though sleep had simply deepened beyond return. The breath that usually marked life was absent. The hands that once moved were now in repose. The atmosphere around the group felt dense but gentle, a mixture of sorrow and acceptance that had settled into the air like a long sigh. The prince's gaze lingered on the still form, and questions moved through him with slow, steady weight. He realized that the old man he had seen before would someday reach this stillness. The sick man would also reach it, and even those who were young and strong would eventually lie in such quiet rest. The chariot moved on again, continuing along the curve of the road. But the prince felt something new, a deep, quiet gravity, neither frightening nor sharp, but spacious and solemn. It was as though the world had whispered a truth, not with thunder, but with a gentle, undeniable murmur. The palace, when he returned, felt different. The bright colors appeared softer, the music more subdued, the laughter of courtiers slightly distant. He ate his meals with slow movements, drank water in small sips, slept with longer breaths, and woke to thoughts that unfolded like long, unbroken dawn. Each act seemed now to contain a deeper meaning, though he could not yet name it. Days drifted onward until the prince, calm and contemplative, asked once more to journey beyond the palace. The king, fearing what further truths might unfold, hesitated. Yet the prince's request was gentle, unwavering. After much thought, the king allowed the procession to assemble again. This time, attendants prepared with extraordinary care. They swept the road 3 times, arranged garlands more densely, stationed musicians at intervals to soften the path with melody. They hoped to wrap the world in enough beauty to hide its harsher contours. Yet the world, shaped by its own rhythms, allowed another quiet truth to appear. As the chariot rolled deeper into the countryside, the prince noticed a man walking alone, his expression serene, his steps slow and even. Unlike the old man, the sick man, or the still form he had seen before, this man radiated a calm that seemed to rise from within rather than from circumstance. His clothes were simple, worn, but clean. His belongings, few in number, hung lightly across his shoulder. His face carried no strain, and his eyes looked outward with a quiet steadiness, as though he had accepted the world and all its truths without resistance. The prince watched him intently. The man moved without hurry, without fear, without desire. The attendants whispered among themselves. He was a wandering seeker, one who had left home to understand the depths of life. The prince absorbed this with deep attention. This fourth sight, unlike the others, did not weigh heavily on him. Instead, it settled in his mind like a low, warm flame, steady, calm, and quietly luminous. The man's steps continued along the road, gentle and unbroken. The prince carried the image into his heart, and something within him felt subtly, profoundly changed. This sight did not bring sorrow, nor confusion, nor fear. It brought direction. The chariot moved forward once again, its wheels turning in slow, steady rotations that matched the prince's quiet breathing. But his mind lingered on the serene wanderer, following the gentle rise and fall of the man's footsteps long after the figure faded into the distance. The prince sat upright, yet relaxed, hands resting loosely on his lap, eyes drifting across the soft countryside. The world felt expanded now, as though a window had opened in the quiet of his understanding. Soft winds curled around the chariot, bending grasses in small waves. Birds passed overhead in unhurried arcs, their wings catching faint sunlight as they drifted toward distant trees. The prince noticed every movement with calm attention, how a cow lowered its head to graze in slow circles, how a potter shaped clay with rhythmic turns of the hand, how the shadows of passing clouds stretched lazily across the fields. Each small scene unfolded as before, yet something in him was subtly rearranged. The four sights, age, sickness, death, and serene renunciation, had settled within him like four stones resting gently at the bottom of a clear pond. They did not disturb the water. They did not stir chaos. They simply lay there in calm permanence, shaping the pond by their presence alone. The prince felt this shift as a quiet deepening of the mind, as though space had opened inside him where new understanding might someday grow. When the chariot returned to the palace, the attendants moved with their usual soft efficiency, preparing warm water, fresh cloth, gentle meals. But the prince followed the long corridor to his chambers in a steady, contemplative walk. The polished stones beneath his feet reflected slow-moving lantern light, and each reflection felt like a thought emerging from stillness. He sat alone for a while, hands resting loosely on his knees. The room around him held a muted glow. Curtains drifted with every small movement of air, sending soft ripples of shadow across the floor. The prince's breath moved in the same rhythm, slow, even, quiet. He observed the rise and fall of his own chest, and the calmness of that simple act soothed him, as though it confirmed a truth he had known all along but had only now begun to see fully. Days passed, and the palace resumed its gentle routines. Musicians played in smooth, soothing progressions. Servants prepared meals with familiar rituals. Dancers practiced their slow, graceful steps, their movements weaving patterns like drifting silk. But the prince carried within him a new quiet. The softness of the palace no longer concealed the truths he had witnessed. Instead, it seemed to echo them. The gentle lines of the palace walls now reminded him of age. The faint cough of an attendant brought to mind sickness. The evening stillness, deep and enveloping, whispered softly of death. And the serene wanderer, walking alone on the open road, returned again and again in his thoughts, like the steady pulse of a distant drum. The prince wandered the palace gardens during these days, walking beneath tall trees whose leaves filtered the sunlight into scattered patches. He would pause beside a small pond where reflections trembled lightly upon the surface. He would watch the gardeners work in patient rhythm, tending to each plant with steady hands. He would observe children playing along the garden's edge, their laughter soft and pure, unaware of life's deeper currents. All these scenes wove themselves into his contemplation. One evening, he climbed to a terrace overlooking the city, a quiet spot where breezes always moved gently along the walls. Below, the streets curved in soft lines through clusters of homes, their rooftops washed in the muted colors of fading light. Fires flickered in distant courtyards, glowing softly like small intentions left to burn through the night. The prince listened to the faint hum of life, voices murmuring in low conversation, occasional laughter drifting upward, the rustle of cloth as merchants closed their stalls. Everything belonged to the broader pattern of the world he had glimpsed. He thought of the old man, whose steps had measured time in slow decline. He thought of the sick man, whose trembling form revealed life's fragility. He thought of the still figure, whose breath had ended quietly beneath the sky. And he thought of the serene seeker, whose calm steps had moved with no fear of age, sickness, or death. These four images circled quietly within him, moving at the pace of drifting leaves. They neither pressed nor demanded. They simply existed, steady, certain, woven into the fabric of existence. The prince sensed that each sight had arrived precisely as it needed to, neither forced nor accidental. The world itself had guided him gently toward them, as though offering a soft hand to lead him through the beginnings of wisdom. Time moved through the palace like a slow river carving a patient path. The prince continued his routines, meals taken quietly, walks taken at dawn, gentle conversation shared with attendants and teachers. But beneath these routines, a quiet longing had begun to take shape. It was not dramatic or restless. It was a subtle pull, much like a low tide urging water toward the sea. He felt himself drawn toward a deeper understanding, toward a truth that lay somewhere beyond comfort and familiar patterns. The four sights had awakened something that could not be returned to silence. One night, as the moon spread gentle light across the palace grounds, the prince stood beneath a flowering tree, feeling the cool air pass slowly across his face. Lanterns swayed softly, their flames bowing with the motions of the breeze. The leaves above him rustled with faint whispers, weaving delicate sound into the stillness. He stood there for a long time, breathing slowly, and allowed his thoughts to rise and settle like small waves brushing against a quiet shore. He knew that life held sorrow, held frailty, held endings. But he had also seen a path that led beyond fear, embodied by the wandering seeker who walked with calm acceptance. The prince felt a stirring within him that resembled the first hint of dawn before sunrise, soft, steady, and full of quiet promise. He did not know yet what path he would take. He did not press for clarity or direction. Instead, he allowed the understanding to deepen slowly, like roots spreading through soft soil. The four sights had not commanded him. They had simply shown him the world as it was. And in doing so, they had begun reshaping the quiet interior of his thoughts. As the night deepened, and lanterns dimmed further, the prince turned toward his chambers with slow, deliberate steps. The air carried the scent of flowering branches, and the distant hum of life in the city reduced itself into a low, comforting murmur. The truth had entered his life not with noise, but with a gentle whisper. And the whisper would linger, deepening into purpose in the quiet days to come. The story settled into stillness, preparing to give way to the next long wave in the sequence of gentle tales. A story of departure shaped not by urgency, but by a slow, contemplative understanding born from these 4 quiet sights. Soft shadows drifted across the palace courtyards as another quiet evening settled over the land. Lanterns flickered gently in the warm dusk air, their small flames swaying like tired dancers who had learned the art of calm repetition. The young prince, now older and deeper in contemplation, walked along the stone paths with the same unhurried rhythm that marked his days. His steps were soft, precise, and steady, resting on the stones without urgency, as though guided by the slow tides of thought moving within him. The 4 sights lingered in his memory like 4 steady points of a constellation, their meaning unfolding gently each time he recalled them. Age, sickness, death, and the calm seeker, they had become companions to his inner quiet. They rose in his thoughts the way early morning fog rose from the earth, forming layers that softened his understanding and invited him toward deeper reflection. He had not forced himself to interpret these visions. Instead, he allowed each one to settle in its own time, to expand like a soft ripple moving through a still pool. The palace around him remained a place of gentle motion and careful balance. Attendants performed daily tasks with practiced ease. Gardeners swept fallen leaves into orderly piles. Musicians rehearsed slow melodies that drifted like distant murmurs through open windows. Every corner of the palace felt familiar, shaped by years of harmony and careful protection. Yet to the prince, these familiar sights now brought a soft ache, not because they lacked comfort, but because he sensed a truth behind them that he could no longer ignore. He found himself drawn to quiet spaces more often, rooms softened by fading sunlight, balconies where wind moved in slow spirals, gardens where vines clung lazily to wooden trellises. In these still spaces, he would sit for long stretches, watching shadows lengthen across the ground, noticing how each shadow changed shape without hurry. These small observations felt like quiet teachings, reminding him that everything, even the calmest beauty, carried the imprint of impermanence. On one such evening, he walked to the far edge of the garden, where the palace met the boundary of the night. The moon had not yet risen, and the sky stretched vast and dim above him. The gentle calls of night birds drifted across the open space, and the fragrance of wet soil rose softly from the earth. He paused beneath a tall tree whose branches held a long memory of seasons. The tree's leaves rustled in a low murmur, and the sound wrapped around him like a tender cloak. He breathed in the quiet air and felt the weight of all he had seen resting softly upon him. It was not a heavy burden, more like a long, patient calling. Age would touch all beings. Illness would come and go like restless wind. Death would arrive with its calm finality, and somewhere beyond these truths, a path waited, walked by the serene seeker who had passed him on the road with such peaceful certainty. The prince returned to his chambers, where warm lamps glowed softly across the polished floor. His attendants arranged cushions with gentle precision, offering subtle gestures of care born from years of service. The prince acknowledged them with a slight nod and moved toward the balcony once more. From there, the city sprawled beneath a darkening sky, its rooftops glowing faintly with the last color of dusk. Small fires flickered in courtyard hearths. Cloth rustled as families settled into their nightly routines. He watched all of this with a tender, growing awareness. These lives, simple, steady, precious, would each move through the same cycles he had witnessed. The realization deepened his compassion, softening his breath and warming his chest with a quiet, gentle sorrow. He understood that the world held more suffering than he had ever known inside the palace walls. And the thought made him linger in silence, letting the stillness speak to him in slow, unbroken waves. Days continued in calm repetition, each one shaped by the same gentle rituals. Yet within the prince, a slow current had begun to move, patient and inevitable. It was not restlessness, nor revolt, nor dissatisfaction. It was simply a recognition, a growing understanding that he could no longer remain enclosed within the palace's comfortable boundaries, while the world outside drifted through cycles of suffering. His heart had deepened, opening inward like a soft blossom responding to early dawn. The king sensed this quiet shift. He observed the prince walking alone more often, pausing before small scenes with thoughtful stillness. The sight of an attendant rubbing tired shoulders after long work, the wilt of a flower losing its color, the faint cough of a musician in the garden. These were small, ordinary moments, but the prince saw them differently now. They formed a tapestry of gentle truths that called to him with a voice softer than wind, yet clearer than any spoken message. In response, the king arranged more feasts, more music, more celebrations, each one designed to surround the prince with pleasure and ease. Dancers spun in long, flowing circles. Lanterns were hung in clusters that filled the night with soft radiance. Sweet fragrances drifted through the halls. But the prince moved through these gatherings as one might move through a dream, aware, present, yet untouched by their temporary comforts. He noticed how the laughter of young guests faded with fatigue, how the musicians' fingers grew sore with continuous playing, how the flowers decorating the hall sagged slightly as the night wore on. He saw, quietly, that all beauty carried a gentle shadow of fading, and this shadow did not frighten him. It simply affirmed what he now understood to be true. One night, when a celebration had ended and the palace fell into deep silence, the prince walked alone through the moonlit corridors. The marble floor glowed faintly beneath his bare feet. Torches dimmed in, their brackets sending thin wisps of smoke curling upward. Outside, the city lay still, its people resting in their homes, each life moving gently toward its next moment. The prince paused near the stable where his horse, Kanthaka, rested peacefully. The animal raised its head slightly, responding to the familiar presence with a soft, slow breath. The prince placed a gentle hand on Kanthaka's neck, feeling the warm pulse beneath the skin. The connection felt deep and simple, as though the horse understood the quiet turning in the prince's life. The prince looked toward the far horizon, where darkness merged with sky. There, beyond the walls, lay the open world, a place of suffering, yes, but also a place where understanding could be found, a place where a path waited, a path that might one day lead to peace, not only for himself, but for all who suffered quietly under the weight of impermanence. A slow decision began to take shape within him, not sudden, not sharp, not driven by emotion. A decision formed with the same pace as a leaf detaching from a branch, the inevitable conclusion of a long, gentle process. The palace breathed in a deep and quiet rhythm as night stretched itself across the sky. Most lamps had dimmed into thin glows, and soft shadows rested along the walls like folded cloth. In this tender stillness, the prince walked through familiar corridors, his footsteps barely brushing the smooth stone. He entered the garden once more, where moonlight drifted through the branches of old trees, settling lightly on leaves and petals as if the night itself were offering a gentle farewell. The stillness around him felt different now, less like a comfort and more like a gentle reminder. It seemed to whisper that everything within the palace, beautiful as it was, remained sheltered from the truths he had seen on the roads beyond. Those truths lingered in his mind in quiet, unbroken threads. The slow bend of the old man's back, the trembling breath of the sick man, the serene, unmoving body of the one who had passed, and the calm, steady steps of the wandering seeker. These images returned to him again and again, not to disturb him, but to guide him, like soft lanterns lighting an unseen path. He walked past the lotus pond, where clusters of leaves floated in still patterns. The water reflected the moon in a pale, trembling shape, and the prince watched it as one watches a familiar thought returning. The pond, like the palace, seemed serene on the surface, but held worlds beneath. Quiet depths where roots and small creatures lived beyond sight. The prince sensed a similarity between the pond and himself, a calm appearance resting above something deeper that had begun to stir. He inhaled softly, the breath moving through him with the same slow patience as the wind moving through the garden. A decision, gentle but firm, was taking shape within him. He would leave the palace, not out of rejection and not out of restlessness, but out of a deep, compassionate understanding that could no longer remain dormant. He wished to understand the nature of suffering, to learn why age bent bodies and why illness took hold, why death arrived in silence, and how the wandering seeker had found peace in the midst of it all. He moved slowly back toward the palace interior, observing the sleeping household with quiet tenderness. Servants rested along the corridors, their bodies curled into gentle shapes of fatigue. Soft breaths rose and fell around him, and he felt a profound affection for those who had shared his days in routine and gentle care. He walked past the musicians' hall, where instruments lay on their sides, their strings resting, their drums cooled by night air. These silent instruments seemed to embody the very stillness in his heart, quiet now, waiting to be awakened into something deeper. In his chambers, soft fabrics hung in long drapes, gently stirred by the night wind. Cushions lay neatly arranged, and a faint aroma of sandalwood lingered as though the room had held on to the memory of quiet meditations. The prince sat on the low platform for a while, allowing his breath to settle into a long, even rhythm. His hands rested loosely on his knees, and his eyes softened as he gazed into the dim space before him. He reflected on the life he had lived, sheltered, warm, safe. These experiences had shaped him gently, offering him comfort and ease. Yet even as he appreciated their presence in his life, he felt the growing understanding that comfort alone could not reveal the full truth of existence. There was a larger world, a world moving in rhythms of joy and sorrow, gain and loss, growth and decay. He sensed that to understand the world fully, one needed to walk through all of its chambers, not only the ones built from ease. The gentle stirring of purpose expanded within him, like a soft flame catching on dry wick. He rose from the platform and approached the sleeping form of those closest to him. They breathed in slow cycles, their faces calm under the pale glow of moonlight. He watched them for a long moment, feeling gratitude for their presence in his life. His affection for them did not waver, it deepened. And in that depth, he realized that leaving was not an act of separation, but an act of compassion, one that sought understanding beyond the palace walls, understanding that might someday help relieve suffering for all beings. He stepped out of the room, letting the curtain fall back into place with barely a sound. The palace corridor stretched before him, long and familiar. Pillars rose in silent rows, like guardians of all he had known. The moon cast faint beams through windows of carved stone, forming patterns across the floor that shifted gently when touched by the wind. He walked through these pools of light as though moving through the memories of his own life. Reaching the stables, he paused beside Kanthaka once more. The horse stirred softly and lifted its head. There was no alarm, only recognition, as if the horse had sensed the quiet current moving within the prince's heart. The prince stroked Kanthaka's mane with a tender touch, feeling the steady warmth beneath his hand. The connection between them felt deep and timeless, woven through years of shared moments. The horse let out a slow, gentle exhale, and the prince rested his forehead briefly against Kanthaka's, feeling their breaths merge into one long, steady rhythm. He saddled Kanthaka quietly, his movements precise and mindful. The leather straps tightened with soft sounds, and the saddle settled smoothly across the horse's back. The prince moved with care, ensuring everything was arranged without causing disturbance. Once prepared, he mounted Kanthaka with the lightness of someone carrying both a deep resolve and a profound calm. As they approached the palace gate, the night air cooled around them, brushing softly against the prince's skin. The world beyond the gate lay dim and vast, its road stretching unseen into darkness. The prince looked at the sleeping guards with gentle eyes, men who had watched over him for years, unaware of the purpose unfolding tonight. He felt no impatience, only a soft ache that acknowledged the tenderness of leaving. Kanthaka stepped forward with slow, measured hooves, and the gate creaked open with a muted sigh. The sound drifted into the night like a quiet thread being loosened. The prince and his horse moved through, entering the open world in silence. The palace remained behind them, warm, serene, filled with memories. And yet the prince did not look back. His decision was not an escape. It was a gentle movement toward truth, as natural as night giving way to dawn. The night embraced him with soft, open arms. The road stretched ahead in long, cool shadows. His heart, steady and tender, followed the rhythm of the wind. The night deepened around the prince and his horse with a hush that felt almost sacred. Cool air drifted through the darkness, brushing softly against the leaves that lined the narrow road. Trees rose like silent companions on either side, their silhouettes swaying gently as though bowing to the quiet purpose of the traveler passing beneath them. Kanthaka's hooves pressed against the earth in steady rhythms, soft and patient, as if matching the beat of the prince's own calm heart. The road unfurled before them like a long, unbroken ribbon, guiding their passage through shadows and moonlight. In some places, thin streams of silver light slipped between branches and illuminated their path. In others, the darkness thickened into a soothing, velvety shade. The prince welcomed both light and shadow. Each stretch of the road felt like part of a gentle conversation between himself and the world, an invitation to move deeper into the quiet truth he sought. He sat tall upon the horse, but his posture held no stiffness. His body moved with Kanthaka in soft, synchronized motions, as natural as breathing. The deeper he traveled into the night, the more he felt a sense of spaciousness growing within him, as though each step forward created new room for understanding. He was leaving behind a life of comfort, yet there was no sorrow in his departure, only tenderness, only calm. The night carried sounds in small, delicate currents. Crickets chirped in thin, steady lines. Leaves rustled in soft clusters like distant whispers. Occasionally, the gentle call of an owl drifted through the trees, stretching toward the sky. Each sound blended into a quiet tapestry that soothed rather than startled, forming a perimeter of calm around the prince's steady purpose. As they moved farther from the palace, Kanthaka occasionally turned its head, ears flicking back as if sensing the last faint traces of familiarity behind them. The prince placed a gentle hand along the horse's neck, a silent reassurance that they were moving together into something profound and kind. The horse's muscles softened under his touch, and their journey continued with renewed, steady breath. Hours passed in slow, wave-like sequences. Shadows shifted, the sky deepened, stars glimmered above in quiet constellations, their pale light pooling faintly on the path whenever the trees parted. The prince lifted his eyes toward them at times, allowing their steady glow to settle into his thoughts. The stars felt timeless, ancient, carrying the memory of countless lives that had passed beneath them. They reminded him of the vastness of existence and the gentle truth that every being played only a small part within that endless, unfolding tapestry. At last, the road opened into a clearing where the night sky stretched wider. In the center of this quiet space, the prince brought Kanthaka to a slow stop. The horse exhaled in a long, soft breath, its sides rising and falling in calm waves. The prince dismounted with measured grace, his feet touching the earth with a sense of solemn tenderness. He stood beside Kanthaka and stroked the horse's mane, feeling gratitude swell quietly within him. This companion had carried him through countless days, through palaces, gardens, festivals, and now through the opening of a new path. The bond between them felt deep, not clinging, but gentle, like two strands intertwined by long patience. In the stillness, the prince stepped a little closer to the edge of the clearing, where a gentle breeze moved through tall grasses in slow ripples. The moon floated high above, resting in its slow orbit like a lantern hung in the heavens. He breathed deeply, letting the cool night air fill him with a soft clarity. A faint cluster of rocks stood nearby, worn smooth by weather and time. The prince moved toward them and removed the ornaments that had adorned him since childhood. Jewels, fabrics, and precious adornments that marked his place within the palace. He laid each piece down with careful reverence. None of these items had ever burdened him, but they belonged to a life he was now gently stepping away from. Their soft glimmering in the moonlight felt like a tender farewell. The prince's hands moved quietly, removing his earrings, his bracelets, the silken cloth draped around his shoulder. He folded the fabric neatly and placed it beside the rocks. Without any sense of urgency, he exchanged these royal garments for simple robes he had carried with him, robes that matched the path he would now walk. The cloth felt different on his skin, lighter, rougher, honest, and he welcomed the new texture as one welcomes an early dawn after a long night. Kanthaka watched these movements with calm attention, the horse's breath creating small clouds in the cool air. The prince approached his companion once more and rested his hands on the animal's cheeks. He pressed his forehead gently against Kanthaka's, sharing a moment of stillness that lasted several soft breaths. It was a gesture of deep affection, of gratitude, and of release. Not a farewell filled with sorrow, but a parting filled with peace. He stepped back, and Kanthaka lowered its head, as though acknowledging the new path opened before them both. The horse would return to the palace in its own time, guided by instinct and the gentle pull of home. The prince turned toward the open world beyond the clearing. The horizon lay dim and quiet, shaped by shadows of distant hills. The road ahead was faint, but he felt no hesitation. He walked forward with slow, deliberate steps, his bare feet touching the cool earth in rhythms that matched the calm inside him. The night welcomed him. The road embraced him. His heart expanded with each quiet step. He moved deeper into the vast world, guided by a purpose that had grown slowly from compassion and understanding. There was no destination in his mind, only the quiet wish to know the truth of life, to understand suffering, and to find a path that could lead to peace. Behind him, the clearing remained still. Ahead of him, a long journey waited, steady, patient, gentle. And so began the renunciation, not as a dramatic departure, but as a soft unfolding, a quiet acceptance of the path he had always been meant to walk. The morning sky spread softly across the world like a long, pale breath. Light gathered slowly at the horizon, not with brilliance or force, but with a tender, gradual quietness. After many years of wandering, years filled with long meditations beneath trees, gentle steps across villages, and nights spent beneath wide skies, the Buddha, newly awakened, calm as still water, walked across a quiet stretch of land toward a peaceful grove known as Deer Park. His steps were unhurried, each one falling softly upon the earth, as though the ground had learned to welcome them. The air carried a cool stillness that wrapped itself around him like a thin, comforting shawl. Nearby, tall grasses swayed with slow, steady motions, and the distant calls of morning birds drifted across the open spaces in low, melodic tones. Nothing in the world seemed rushed. Each sound, each motion belonged to a great, unbroken rhythm that matched the calm inside him. He had awakened beneath the Bodhi tree not long before, a moment of deep understanding that had risen within him like a gentle dawn, illuminating truths he had sought with patient devotion. Now, with that understanding held quietly in his heart, he walked toward the grove where 5 monks waited. They had once been his companions during years of austere practice, though they had parted ways when he discovered that harsh extremes did not lead to clarity. Still, he felt a tender affection for them, not shaped by history or expectation, but by a compassion that had grown soft and deep with his awakening. The path leading to Deer Park was lined with small clusters of trees whose branches bowed lightly in the morning breeze. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in thin, dappled patterns that shifted with the gentle movement of wind. Occasionally, a deer stepped through the grass in cautious, graceful strides, pausing to look toward the quiet figure walking the path. The grove was home to creatures who lived in soft harmony with the land, their lives unfolding in gentle cycles of grazing, resting, and wandering. The Buddha moved through this place as though he belonged to the same quiet rhythm. When he reached the outer boundary of the grove, he paused beneath a tall tree and watched the deer move in small herds across the field. Some bent their necks to graze, others stood still, listening to the morning's subtle sounds. Their gentleness felt like a mirror of the calm within him. In their presence, the world seemed to breathe in long, smooth waves, and he allowed that breath to flow through him before continuing toward the monastery ruins where the 5 monks waited. The monks sat beneath a shaded pavilion, their robes worn from travel, their bodies shaped by years of discipline. They had left him in earlier days, believing he had abandoned the path when he gave up the severe austerities that weakened him. But as they watched him approach now, they sensed something different, something quiet and steady, like a still flame that burned without wavering. They had never seen him walk with such softness, nor with such serene clarity in his expression. He came to sit with them, settling upon the earth with slow, deliberate movements. The breeze carried the scent of wild grass and distant flowers across the grove, and for a long, gentle moment, there was only silence. The deer nearby continued their unhurried grazing, and the monks watched the calm man before them with a growing curiosity that rose not in sharp spikes, but in broad, slow waves. The Buddha looked at them with eyes that held no trace of judgment and no hint of demand. His presence alone seemed to settle the grove into a deeper quiet. The monks felt their own breath fall into softer patterns, their posture adjust into more relaxed shapes. Even the birds overhead seemed to lower their calls into gentler tones, as if the world itself recognized the stillness unfolding. In this quiet field, beneath the broad canopy of sky, the Buddha prepared to speak for the first time since awakening, not to persuade, not to command, but to share what had arisen in him like a slow, illuminating dawn. The moment carried no ceremony, no swelling of sound, no grand proclamation, only calmness, only breath, only the steady rhythm of truth coming to rest upon the world. The grove held its breath in a long, gentle pause. The air felt unusually clear, as though it had been washed by the slow light of the rising sun. The Buddha sat with a stillness that seemed older than the morning itself. The 5 monks watched him in quiet anticipation, though the feeling that filled the space was softer than expectation, more like the quiet curiosity of someone listening for a distant, familiar sound. A slight breeze drifted through the tall grass, bending each blade in slow, synchronized waves. The deer in the nearby meadow continued their calm grazing, sometimes lifting their heads to glance toward the shaded pavilion before returning to the patient rhythm of eating. The world moved as though wrapped in a veil of tenderness. In this soft atmosphere, the Buddha began to speak. His voice did not rise sharply or fall dramatically. It unfolded in long, smooth currents, steady, clear, and gentle. Each word seemed to drift outward like a small ripple across a wide, tranquil pond. There was no urgency in his tone, no pressing insistence. Instead, his words carried the natural ease of truth that had settled deeply within him. He spoke first of the middle way. He described how he had lived in luxury during his early years, surrounded by comfort, ease, and beauty. He explained how this life, though soft and warm, did not lead to understanding, for comfort alone clouded the deeper truths of the world. Then he spoke of years spent in austerity, nights of fasting, days of pushing the body to its limits, long stretches of time spent chasing an idea of purity through deprivation. He spoke of how such extreme efforts weakened the body and clouded the mind, turning discipline into suffering rather than clarity. The monks listened in silence, their faces softening as they absorbed the gentle rhythm of his words. They too had practiced the harsh austerities. They knew the strain, the weariness, the dullness that crept into the mind when the body was denied its simple needs. Hearing him speak with such calm understanding stirred something quiet within them. The Buddha explained, in soft flowing tones, that neither extreme was the path. Neither indulgence nor deprivation brought the mind to clarity. Instead, there was a middle path, a gentle path, balanced, steady, free from excess, and free from harm. This middle way was not shaped by extremes, but by equilibrium. It supported the body, steadied the mind, and opened space for insight. His words moved like slow waves rolling across the shore, each one touching the monks with quiet certainty. They felt something ease within them, as though an invisible knot had loosened. The grove remained silent except for the faint rustle of leaves. The monks leaned slightly forward, drawn without effort but the calm gravity of the moment. The Buddha continued speaking with the same soft clarity, introducing the truth that had unfolded within him during his awakening. He spoke of suffering, the gentle acknowledgement that life carried dissatisfaction, discomfort, longing, and loss. He spoke not in tones of sorrow, but in soft acceptance, as one might observe a simple, natural fact. He described how suffering touched all beings, how it arose from clinging, desire, craving, and the longing for things to remain when all things naturally changed. The monks listened, their breath slowing to match the even rhythm of his voice. The words settled into them like seeds falling upon soft soil. He spoke of the cause of suffering, the soft tendrils of desire that wrapped around the heart. He spoke of the cessation of suffering, the gentle possibility that the heart could let go, release its grasp, and find peace in understanding. Then he spoke of the path, the gentle, eightfold path, right understanding, right mindfulness, right effort, and all the steady practices that guided a mind toward clarity. His words drifted through the grove without force. They simply moved, slow and unhurried, touching the monks like a warm breeze passing over calm water. Each truth he shared was delivered with softness, as though offering a delicate flower to an open palm. Around them, the grove shifted in small, almost imperceptible ways. Sunlight fell more fully upon the clearing. Deer drew nearer, grazing in relaxed arcs. The sound of distant birds entered and left the moment like breaths. The monks themselves felt their forms soften, not in weakness, but in a loosening of the tension they had carried for so long. The Buddha's teachings, spoken in this quiet grove, felt less like lessons and more like gentle unveiling. The truths he shared were not new inventions. They were ancient, woven into the fabric of the world, waiting for someone to name them with calm clarity. The monks felt these truths settle within them. Their hearts, which had long chased extremes, now rested in the stillness of understanding. The world around them grew softer, as though its edges had been smoothed by a long, quiet tide. When the Buddha paused, silence filled the space with the weightlessness of a deep breath. The grove remained still, as though the earth itself were listening. After the Buddha's words drifted into silence, a delicate hush gathered in the space between him and the 5 monks. Nothing moved quickly. Even the leaves that trembled in the breeze did so with an unhurried grace, their soft movements blending seamlessly with the calm that had settled across the clearing. The monks sat quietly, absorbing the quietness of the moment. The truths that had been spoken did not rush through them. They sank slowly, gently, like warm light filtering through deep water. Each monk felt a subtle shift within, a kind of soft opening. The heavy strictness they had carried from years of austerity loosened, and a steady peace began to take its place. The Buddha watched them with serene compassion, not expecting immediate transformation, not urging their minds in any direction. He simply allowed the silence to stretch outward, like a slow ripple extending across a pond. In that silence, the monks felt their own breath begin to match the long, even rhythm of the grove. A deer stepped quietly from beneath a patch of shade, its ears flicking with restful curiosity. It grazed along the soft edge of the clearing, its movements gentle, its presence untroubled. The monks watched the animal wander, and for a moment it felt as though the deer itself were a part of the teaching, a small reminder of the ease, balance, and natural harmony that the middle way embodied. The Buddha lifted his gaze toward the sky, where soft light filtered down in muted gold. His expression held the same calm depth that had arisen within him beneath the Bodhi tree. In that awakened clarity, the world seemed spacious, tender, and interconnected. All beings, he understood, shared the same cycles of joy and sorrow, birth and death, longing and release. His compassion extended naturally, flowing outward like soft light diffusing across an open field. As the monks continued to sit, their minds gently settling, a subtle transformation unfolded within them. Something old and rigid dissolved, a hardness shaped by strict, punishing effort, leaving behind a softer, steadier presence. They began to understand why the Buddha had left behind severe austerities, why he had embraced a path shaped by balance rather than force. The middle way revealed itself not as compromise, but as gentle wisdom, a path that eased the heart rather than hardening it. One of the monks, whose face had long been stern from years of strict practice, felt the tension in his chest loosen, as though a tightly bound knot had finally undone itself. Another monk felt tears gather, not from sadness, but from a tender recognition that the life he had lived had always been close to truth, yet not fully in harmony with it. These emotions arose softly, like mist forming at dawn, and passed through them with quiet release. As the grove warmed with late morning light, the Buddha continued speaking in gentle tones. He explained how mindfulness guided the mind toward clarity, how right speech softened interactions with others, how right effort steadied the heart without strain. The monks listened with reverence, though the tone of the moment remained unforced, more like a group of friends sharing quiet understanding than a formal lesson. Every word he spoke emerged like a wave from a calm sea, smooth, slow, inevitable, and soothing. The monks felt themselves gradually aligning with the rhythm of his teachings. Their breath deepened, their shoulders lowered, their minds grew quieter. It was as if each lesson carried its own tranquility, diffusing gently through their bodies. After some time, the Buddha paused once more, and the grove grew deeper in stillness. A soft breeze passed through, carrying with it the faint scent of wild flowers and warm grass. The monks lowered their eyes in peaceful contemplation, allowing comprehension to settle into them as gently as leaves settling onto water. The world around them seemed to take on a new shape, not changed outwardly, but seen with calmer, clearer eyes. The suffering they had once tried to overpower with harsh discipline now appeared understandable, manageable, even tender in its universality. They recognized that every being carried longing, fear, uncertainty, and hope. And in this recognition, their hearts softened more. Then, in the shade of the Deer Park Grove, the monks bowed their heads in quiet acceptance. They did not bow out of duty or tradition. They bowed from understanding, from the quiet realization that the Buddha had walked a path that revealed truths broader and softer than any they had pursued before. In that moment, they became his first disciples. This moment did not rush, nor did it echo loudly. It unfolded with the slow, natural grace of a flower opening to morning light. The grove felt larger, the air clearer, the earth warmer beneath them. The Buddha looked upon them with the same calm compassion he carried for all beings, a compassion that flowed gently across the space, like sunlight spreading across a peaceful field. As the sun climbed higher, casting thin beams across the clearing, the deer continued to graze. The monks continued to breathe in long, slow cycles, and the Buddha remained seated with serene ease, his presence guiding the rhythm of the grove. Thus, in the quiet heart of Deer Park, the first teaching became the beginning of a long, gentle lineage, one that would move through the world in waves of calm understanding. The grove, with its soft winds and slow-moving shadows, held this moment like a precious seed, planted in soil that knew how to nurture patience. And the day drifted onward, soft and unhurried, carrying the first turning of the wheel of Dharma like a whisper rising into the vast, open sky. A wide plain opened beyond the village, a place where river grasses bent in long, patient waves, and where distant hills held their slow lines against the sky. In that soft landscape, there lived an elephant of great size, a creature whose footsteps made the earth remember its own breadth. The elephant's name was Nalagiri, and for many seasons he had been known among villagers and travelers alike. Sometimes calm, sometimes restless, and at other times stirred by a temper that moved like a quick wind through dry grass. Life around the plain tended to the patient rhythm of seasons. Farmers walked their furrows with steady hands. Women mended cloth with fingers that repeated familiar motions. Children ran at dusk, their laughter thin as bell tones that faded into evening. Yet even in this quiet world, small ripples of disturbance could pass through. One year, when rains were lighter than usual and food stores felt thinner, Nalagiri's temper grew and hardened like clay in the sun. He received coarse treatment from men who feared his strength, and each harsh word or careless shove pressed upon him like another small bruise. In time, a rumor began to move through nearby settlements. Nalagiri had been provoked, and now he walked with a deep, smoldering unease. He had been pushed and prodded into anger, and the villagers who spoke of him did so in low, measured tones. Some spoke of attempts to calm him with offerings and gentle words. Others told of the ways that fear had multiplied around the beast, like dry leaves catching spark. The plain learned to step more softly where he traveled. At this same time, the Buddha, whose presence moved with an ease like a slow river, was traveling near the plain. His walk carried no urgency. He moved like someone whose feet had learned to listen to the thin rhythms of earth and sky. Word of the troubled elephant drifted toward him through travelers and monks who passed. They spoke of Nalagiri's great size, of the fury that now marked his eyes, and of the worry that the animal's anger stirred in the hearts of nearby people. The Buddha took the news not with alarm, but with quiet attention. He moved toward the place where the elephant had last been seen, not with force, but with a gentle intention to be present where suffering swelled. He walked along a path cut by many feet beneath a blue vault of sky that felt broad and patient. As he approached the edges of the plain, he noticed how the villagers' faces tightened into cautious lines. Even children moved closer to their homes, watching from distant doorways. The air felt charged with a low tension, but it moved at a slow, reverent speed rather than a frantic pace. Those who watched held their breath in waves. Some expected confrontation. Others feared that the beast might charge with the full weight of his fury. But the Buddha remained motionless, and there was a particular stillness in his face that seemed to hold an unspoken promise of gentleness. The plain itself seemed to pause, the grasses bending as if to listen. Nalagiri's approach slowed as curiosity and anger braided together within him. He sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, while the sunlight painted his hide with warm tones. The villagers retreated quietly, forming a soft ring of distance, and the hush that lay upon the field deepened. The elephant stopped a short way from the Buddha and lifted his trunk high in a motion that mixed searching with uncertainty. Rather than recoil or brandish fear, the Buddha lowered his gaze and made a small, deliberate movement of ease, an action that resembled the natural rhythm of a deep, untroubled breath. He did not turn his back, and he did not move closer to provoke. Instead, he allowed himself to be available, calm, open, and unafraid. The simplicity of presence itself carried an invitation like a slow current moving toward a worn shore. Nalagiri's eyes, which until then had shown coiled heat, began to tremble with a different color of feeling. His trunk moved in softer arcs. He sniffed once, twice, and the faint scent of the Buddha, sandalwood smoke, worn cloth, and the sweetness of patient breath wove into the animal's experience. Something in the elephant's muscles released, not from force, but from a recognition that met him without threat. or harshness. The Buddha spoke in a voice that did not stir the air much, like the murmur of distant water. The words were not commands nor implorations. They were gentle statements, careful and paced like stones dropped into wide, still pools. He spoke of calmness and of simple, steady breaths. He spoke of the kindness that soft hands could offer, and of the way that anger, when met with gentleness, slowly unknits its tight coil. Each phrase was light, but the meaning settled with a weight that belonged to truth rather than pressure. Nalagiri listened. The great beast's trunk lowered, and his shoulders, tense from long days of being prodded and pushed, softened in a manner that looked almost like a release of old knots. A long, slow exhalation passed through him, a breath that had the fullness of a river easing through a narrow channel after a season of drought. The villagers watched with quiet astonishment as tension in their midst unspooled without spectacle, as if a thick rope had been untied and allowed to fall into gentle loops on the ground. A child who had hidden close to a doorway watched with wide eyes and could not keep silent. She stepped forward, not in boldness, but in small curiosity, holding a small offering of fruit in two trembling hands. The child's movement did not disturb the calm. Nalagiri's trunk extended with slow curiosity and took the fruit with a tenderness that surprised even himself. The contact was soft, palmed, and careful, and in that small act, a tiny bridge formed between fear and trust. The Buddha's gaze remained steady and compassionate, as though his calm had become a field large enough to hold the elephant's grief. He did not claim ownership of the moment. He simply allowed his presence to support an ease that seemed to rise from the plain itself. Nalagiri, having tasted the child's offering and felt no sharp pain or insult, lowered his head and settled, his enormous body folding into a repose that no one had expected to come so quietly. From that stillness grew a small abundance of relief. The villager's shoulders unbunched. Breath returned slowly to normal form. Conversations began in low tones, strained at first, then softer, then honest, like water reclaiming its course. The elephant lay down like a great, rounded hill sinking into the earth, and his heavy breathing settled into long, measured waves. In the hush that followed, the Buddha rose gently, his movement as natural and unhurried as a cloud drifting across the sky. He walked a small circle around Nalagiri, pressing no claim, making no demands, and the elephant watched with sleepy curiosity. Those who had long feared Nalagiri's anger now saw that gentleness could shift the fiercest heart. The story of that quiet arrival and the slow easing of fury moved among them like a seed that needed water and time. They did not proclaim salvation. They simply resumed their lives with a new sense that even great disturbances might be soothed with steady care. As days folded into one another following that soft encounter, Nalagiri's pattern gently altered. He no longer prowled with the same sharp tension. The villagers, in turn, changed how they met him. Where rough hands had once prodded, soft gestures were offered. Where loud shouts had once risen, quiet calls now beckoned. In small, repeated exchanges, an offered fruit here, an unhurried voice there, trust rooted slowly and without fanfare. The Buddha did not remain long in that plain. His path continued on its slow arc across many fields and villages. Yet the trace of his presence lingered like dew. People spoke of the calm man who had stood like a slow river and allowed anger to cool with compassion rather than force. They spoke not with boastfulness, but in gentle, repeated murmurs that became a quiet teaching of their own. That patience shapes change more surely than haste. Nalagiri, in time, became part of the plain's ordinary rhythm rather than its frightened exception. He walked among tall grasses with slow, deliberate steps, his ears flicking like soft leaves in a mild wind. Children, remembering the day when a child had offered fruit, sometimes came near to watch him graze. Their small hands kept respectful distance, and Nalagiri seemed to sense the tenderness of those cautious presences. He accepted their gaze without unrest, and in return, the children learned that strength could be as still as a mountain and as gentle as moss. The villagers learned also to honor the quietness that had calmed their heart. They mended fences with hands that hummed low songs of patience. They fed animals with measured motions. They remembered often to breathe slowly when tempers rose, finding that the space between an angry word and its utterance could be filled with a softer choice. The plain's life smoothed into deeper measures of care, measures that did not require ceremonies or grandiose vows, only tiny, steady practices repeated with thoughtfulness. In the years that followed, the tale of Nalagiri's calming became like a soft stone thrown into a wide pond. The ripples moved outward slowly, faint and persistent, touching edges that once seemed unreachable. Travelers passing through the region would sometimes sit beneath the same trees where the Buddha had paused and listen to elders recount the story in low voices. No one claimed that the elephant had become a saint. Rather, the story held a simple lesson, that an open heart and patient presence might mend what fear and roughness had frayed. At twilight, when the sky leaned toward purple and the air cooled to a gentle hush, Nalagiri would often stand at the riverbank and let the current whisper past his legs. He seemed to enjoy the rhythm of water slipping by, and the world around him moved in softer circles. People who watched him go about their small routines felt a calmness grow in their chests, a subtle warmth that had less to do with spectacle and more to do with the ordinary miracle of gentleness gently returned. The Buddha's journey continued, and he carried the memory of that plain with him in a quiet place of his heart. For him, the episode was not an achievement, but an instance of ordinary compassion applied with steady presence. It was a living lesson in how awareness and gentleness could open locked hearts. He traveled onward, not to display this small miracle, but to continue offering the same calm attention wherever suffering moved. And so the story of Nalagiri rested within the world as a quiet example. It did not demand imitation, it invited it. Those who heard the tale often found themselves practicing small acts of calm. Hands paused before a harsh word, a slow breath taken when anger rose, a patient offering when fear surged. Such acts, repeated across many days, formed a gentle architecture of compassion, and within it, the world, one small plane at a time, learned to hold its tempers with softer hands. When evening fell and the plain folded into shadow, lanterns placed at doorways glowed in softened bands, and the rhythm of life slowed into long, steady breaths. Nalagiri lay beneath a fig tree and breathed like distant surf, a deep inhale followed by an equally long, contented exhale. The villagers moved with an ease that had grown careful and kind, and the land itself seemed soothed by the gentle practices that had replaced hasty fear. In the hush of those nights, the tale of the great elephant, who had been calmed without harm, drifted on the air. It was spoken in low tones, tucked into lullabies, and told again by elders to sleepy children who asked soft, curious questions. The story took its place among many quiet teachings, not as the loudest nor the most ornate, but as one of the steady ones, a story that taught the people how to meet fury with stillness and how to meet fear with patience. And so the plain kept its slow rhythm, shaped by small, careful gestures. The memory of Nalagiri's anger faded not because it was denied, but because it was met with patience and transformed through repeated, gentle acts. The tale ended, as all gentle tales do, not with a loud flourish, but with the ordinary closing of a day, a settled heart, a quiet village, and a world that leaned a little more toward compassion, one calm breath at a time.